You are listening to the podcast When Life Gives You Lemons, presented by me, Emma Levy. Having worked with elite athletes for most of my career, it's always intrigued me that a significant number of high-performing individuals have encountered some form of adversity earlier in their lifetime. My fascination into this grew when I had my own brush with adversity, when I was diagnosed with breast cancer in May 2020, in the midst of the global pandemic, at the age of 36. During this period, I questioned whether it was my positive mindset or something deeper, which enabled me to bounce back and to train and compete for a triathlon just 1 month following completion of all active cancer treatment. The goal of this podcast is to explore this concept further by meeting a variety of high-performing individuals who have experienced adversity but who have come back stronger. Today I'm welcoming Nick Conn to the podcast. Nick has a remarkably unique story. In his early 20s, he was a police officer who became addicted to cocaine and ended up homeless in Berlin and on the run from the Albanian Mafia. Unbelievably, Nick managed to turn his life around, and he has now been clean for 14 years. He is now the founder and CEO of a drug and alcohol rehab centre, Help for Addiction, and I'm thrilled he's here today to talk to us. Hello, Nick. Thank you for coming to chat with us today. Could you just start by telling us your story and how you got into drugs in the first place?
So for me, I'd always suffered with low self-esteem and insecurity. And when I got introduced to cocaine, ironically, when I passed my medical exam for entrance into the police. So it was like a celebration thing. And I'd never tried it before. I'd smoked a bit of weed before, but it was never a thing. I took cocaine, and all of a sudden those insecurities, everything that I'd experienced, it just went. And it was replaced with this kind of overwhelming euphoria, this overwhelming confidence, this feeling that I pretty much searched for my whole life. And the drug did for me what I couldn't do for myself.
So you talk quite positively about the drugs.
Absolutely. I've done so many talks to schools on drugs, because people go into schools, don't do drugs, they're bad for you. Kids don't listen to that. Mm-hmm. My experience was effectively the drug did for me what I couldn't do for myself. The consequences that followed were obviously very, very dramatic, and I wouldn't recommend anyone going down that road. However, drugs and alcohol are not someone's problem. They're someone's solution. Mm-hmm. And it certainly did for me. It was that initially.
Yeah. So how was your childhood? How was your school days?
Great childhood, great school days. Can't blame anything on trauma. And there's obviously many different entry points into addiction, but that certainly wasn't mine. Yeah. It was pretty much, just insecurities and low self-esteem.
And I've seen you write about your ADHD before as well.
Yeah, so I actually didn't know that I had ADHD until I had my first child.
Right, okay.
Which was quite unusual how it came around, because when I was training for the police, you have to train for 18 weeks and you've got to get over 80% every week or you're out. Yeah. So I'm struggling to take in this information. I'm trying to learn it. I'm staying up all night. I'm falling asleep. It's not being retained. And then I thought, I'll get some cocaine. And so my using started in isolation pretty much from the beginning. It wasn't really the partying and the this, that, and the other. And so I started using cocaine whilst I was training, and all of that information was going in. I was retaining it all. So ultimately, what I didn't know is I had undiagnosed ADHD, and that a stimulant can help with that, which is why they prescribe amphetamine-based drugs for ADHD. So that was all unknown. But when I had my child, it was trying to remember all the chores, like everything that you had to do for a baby. And for me, it just wasn't second nature. My wife, to her, she was just meant for it. She's amazing. But I was speaking to a friend of mine who's a consultant psychiatrist, and I said, I'm really struggling because I didn't realise I actually suffered with postnatal depression.
Oh, wow.
Which I didn't know men could.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to say how I was feeling because I didn't want to patronise women or anything like that. So I didn't realise that men could suffer with postnatal depression, and I really struggled. I think maybe I'm naturally selfish and you have to become selfless. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I just struggled. It was the lack of sleep. And in recovery, I follow a HALT kind of method, which is hungry, angry, lonely, tired.
Mm-hmm.
So any 4 of those can be a potential trigger for me.
Right.
So sleeping's always been important, not being lonely, angry.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I'm never really hungry. So that it started to affect me in many ways, and using wasn't an option, and it was coming out in other ways. So
how do you manage your ADHD now?
So that he ironically said you should have an assessment for ADHD, and I did, and passed or failed with flying colours, whatever the answer would be. But we tried many different drugs. Now, for me, my tolerance to stimulants is very high.
Yeah.
So when I took the drug, I went straight to like a come down feeling, and for me, my head's gone bang, get some more, take some more. Typical addict, right?
Yeah.
So as soon as that started happening, I thought, this has to stop. So now you just find ways of coping.
Yeah, because I'm surprised actually that you were kind of able as an addict to take the drugs for your ADHD.
Yeah, and you've got to be careful because some people can abuse it, but it's got to be kept a close eye on.
Yeah. So looking back at your school days, do you kind of see ADHD behaviours that would have affected you back then?
Yeah, so I have what you call ADD. I haven't got the H, the hyperactivity.
Yeah.
Kind of wish I did at times. But no, I haven't got the H. So I can recall, and it's amazing how things can affect you as you grow up, because I was in a class and the teacher was talking about something or rather. I wasn't paying attention. And then he stopped and said, "Is there any questions?" And I asked a question to exactly what he just said.
Yeah.
And everyone laughed. And that, in turn, kind of affected me asking questions, if that makes sense. Some people just do it naturally. I have to really try hard to ask questions. So I really have to try to be mindful of that.
Interesting. And so do you think any of kind of that schooling and your childhood, any of that made you want to be in the police force? Like, what appealed to you about the police force?
So my older brother was in it.
Okay.
And like anything, you hear the fun sort of stuff and the chases and the police chases, the car chases and foot chases and any type of chase, the fights, the this, that and the other. And you think you could either be sat behind a desk, which didn't really appeal to me then, alternatively something quite adrenaline fueled. So I kind of followed in that footsteps, I think.
Yeah.
But I also think that I was pretending to be someone that I wasn't, because my brother was meant for that, although he's not in it anymore. For me, they just weren't my people.
No, was it never right then?
No.
So how long were you in the police before you left?
I was in it for about 4 or 5 years. And then I had to leave due to an assault. So it's a whole drama. I won't dive in too much into that.
Drug related?
Not per se. It was because I was up all night before, so I was probably short-tempered. But it was towards someone that was committing an offence on a child, which was seen. So
you were asked to leave the police force?
So I attacked this gentleman in police custody.
Right.
So I was advised to resign.
Okay.
Otherwise, I could have been faced charges.
Right. Okay. So you were taking drugs in those 4 or 5 years in the police. Did anyone ever know about that?
No, I mean, when you're training, you have people coming from all over. So let's say people from Newcastle, it's quite hard to get into the county police forces. So what they do is they try and get into the Met, which is a bit easier, do 2 years, and then they transfer, which is a way to do it.
Yeah.
So when you're training at Hendon, you get a lot of people coming from all over the country. So, and obviously back then they trained you in Hendon, and I grew up in Bushy, so Watford was kind of like my stomping ground.
Yeah.
So we'd go out on a night out and things would happen,
Yeah.
and what have you. So during that stage, I think it was more fun, and other people, officers, trying to obviously be very diplomatic in what I say,
Yeah.
would sometimes get involved. Whether that's continued or not for them, I don't know.
Yeah. So were you, when you were working kind of 9 to 5 or night shifts, you were on drugs? So it wasn't just it wasn't just going out at night.
No. And anyone that's done cocaine or struggled with a cocaine addiction will be aware of the paranoia that comes with it. When you're a police officer in police uniform walking past a mirror, that takes your paranoia to a whole new level, especially being in a police station.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not good.
So you would be taking drugs in the police station?
Yeah.
Wow. And no one ever caught you?
I almost got caught.
You did
got caught. So there was a call that came. I was doing a line of cocaine in the police toilet. And there was a call that came through on the radio. I think from the top of my head, it was something like a traffic warden being attacked or something. So we've ran out, got in the car, blue lights, got there and realised that I'd left my credit card and a rolled up sort of £5 note and my cocaine on the toilet seat.
Yeah.
So I had to make up an excuse to my colleague that I'd not replenished my CS spray, something along those lines. So he's like, no, it's fine. I was like, no, we're turning the car around. So I had to turn the car around, ran in, got it. And as I walked out of that cubicle, I think it was either my sergeant or the inspector that walked straight into that cubicle.
Wow.
So it was a matter of seconds.
Yeah. And at that point, did you think enough's enough, or you just thought, whatever? No.
It was like, wow, that was close.
Okay, wow. Okay, so then you left the police force, and what happened then?
So a variety of kind of jobs, estate agency jobs, things like that. And the thing is, when you're going through early stage addictions, when I was sort of 19, 20 at that age, and I was on sort of 26, 27,000 pounds, and I was living with my family. So there was no financial consequences, things were good. But over time, the loans start coming out, the credit cards start being taken out, and the debt starts coming, and it just progresses. And I think, so I did a variety of different jobs, and I always looked at myself like, I'm doing wrong stuff, but I'm a good person. I've always known I'm a good person. And it's like a real conflict that's going on internally. It's like, why am I doing this? But I am a good person.
Were you doing bad stuff to people, to friends, families?
No, it was to people that I really didn't care about more. But it was, eventually when I was in a estate agency, I ended up stealing from houses. And I thought I'd do it cleverly by the ones that we had the keys registered with us. I'd go there, but I'm going to another property, and so it wasn't tracked.
Wow. And you would steal money or
I'd steal
items?
Cameras or whatever I could. And for me, I thought that was my lowest, because thieving was something that I've always hated. I hate thieves. And this just was really starting to go against who I was.
Yeah.
But then, as I said right at the beginning, the drugs aren't the problem, they're the solution. When we feel these emotions and these feelings, we push it back down by taking another substance. So that's part of the journey. And I think over time it kind of built up and the debt built up, and I ended up wanting to get away from everything. And I ended up taking a job with a company, with TUI.
Yeah. The travel company.
The travel company, to do a snowboarding rep in Austria. And I thought, what a great opportunity. Get away from everything.
Yeah.
There won't be any cocaine there. Lol.
Yeah, at a ski resort.
In the middle of the mountains.
Yeah.
Yeah. And once again, so I took that job and I went, and I remember the dealers were closing in on me, and we got a bus. There was like a coach that they put on from Camden that drives you to Austria. And I remember as this coach was pulling off, it was like relief, phone off, relief. And but so I kind of went out there, did a snowboard season, and started drinking a bit more, found the only dealer that was in this resort probably within about 7 minutes. And I would say it was more controllable, but it definitely, it wasn't as bad as it was. But the drinking started creeping up.
Right.
Now, drinks have never really been a thing for me, but it was more of the partying aspect that, and that's what kind of came with it. So so that's kind of where it went. And then when that season came to an end, I came back, did this, that and the other, and then ended up getting a job with a company called MRI, where they placed me in Berlin.
Right.
And that's where it went to a whole new level.
So before you went to Berlin, things were kind of at a social state, you'd say. You weren't in debt anymore.
The debt was still there. It was just being ignored or run from. Okay,
so then you went to Berlin, and what happened there?
Had a lovely holiday, came home. So I got, we went out for like the new team. We went to a bar called AM to PM in an area called Hackerschemart, which was like the Camden equivalent of Berlin. And I blagged us into the VIP area. And in the VIP area, there was this guy I wrote about in my book. I can't remember what name I gave him, but his name was Arta. And he was with girls, and obviously I started chatting to him, and he managed to get me some cocaine and started talking to him and befriending him. Well, it turns out that Arta ran brothels in Berlin.
Right.
Now, in Berlin, brothels are completely legal. However, what they were doing is, because it was actually quite clever. So over here, like if the finance industry, if they take clients out, they might take them to a strip club or something on the company card. Well, over there, they take them to brothels. And they were paying sort of €100 for a gram of cocaine, which is sort of double the price, but through the brothel, so via credit cards. So they were selling large amounts amongst all their brothels via credit cards. It was all legal transactions, so to speak, but obviously what they were giving them was illegal. So they had quite a few of those selling a lot of that, and I just started hanging around there more. And then it was like, oh, Nick, can you do us a favour? This brothel's quiet, that one's busy. Can you take some of the girls from here and take them over there? So I drive them over there, and then I'd be given a bit of cocaine and this, that and the other. And then that kind of escalated, and to the point that I would do other favours and be given cocaine constantly. What I didn't know is that all of this cocaine that I was being given was on debt. I thought, and anyone would assume, it was for the like what I'm helping them with.
Yeah.
So eventually they called in that debt, which was 15, 20 or £1,000, and or euros, I can't remember. And I was like, how do you want me to get that? And they're like, well, you've got you've got like 4 days or something that they gave me. And now, unfortunately, these people don't accept payment plans or IOUs, so I was forced to, and at the same time, I lost my job.
I was going to ask if you were still doing your 9-to-5 job.
So
you lost it because you weren't able to function.
So it's frustrating, really, because it turns out that the company I was working for was actually a huge scam.
Okay.
Right? You just can't make this up. So MRI, I mean, it's in the papers for anyone that wants to Google them. So MRI stands for McAntony Realty International. And it's owned by a guy called Darragh McAntony, an Irish guy. And they were at all the property, property abroad sort of exhibitions, like at the Excel and things like that. So you go there, if you can prove that you have the funds to purchase a property, they fly you out to Berlin, they put you up in a hotel and arrange for someone like me to pick them up, tour them about Berlin, do the spiel that they teach us, and sell them these properties. But the notary was all involved in this as well. So it turns out what they were actually buying wasn't property.
Oh, wow.
And that hit the papers. They even sponsored, I think, Portsmouth Football Club. So branding wise, they looked like a very reputable. So then they pay people like me, they put you up in accommodation, they give you a car, they pay you a basic salary, so, and this is a global operation.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't question it, but it turns out that I only found out maybe 10 years ago that was in the paper.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So,
Gosh.
But they had the audacity to fire me for drugs. So
they fired you first for drugs.
Fired me first.
So you're in a massive debt.
Massive debt. I was telling my family how well I was doing because I wanted them to be proud of me. Mm-hmm. Back then there wasn't FaceTime, Skype, I think, was just starting. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't any of that kind of video thing, so they couldn't see that I looked like shit.
Yeah. Did you open up to friends at all? Or no one knew what you were going through?
People knew that I'd struggled and then I stopped. And I think my family thought, things were going very good for me. Mm-hmm. Certainly the impression I was giving.
Yeah.
And, so where was I at? There's my ADHD
you're in debt.
in there.
Yeah. you basically, you lost your job and you owe these guys $20,000.
Yeah, so they called that in. So I ended up, when you lose your job, you lose your apartment.
Right.
So I'm in an area. I literally had no idea what to do. I remember going to the Ku'damm, which is where it's like the Knightsbridge of Berlin. It's the best way I can explain it. In an area called Charlottenburg. It's a beautiful area. And I remember just sitting down. It was sort of 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening, and sitting in the doorway of Gucci. And I didn't leave there for, I think, a good part of a week.
Oh, dear.
And that was basically it. So I'm now homeless. And then I got to the point that these 3 German guys tried to wheel me, and I ended up punching him in the testicles, and then they kicked the daylights out of me. And I remember I thought, that's it, I'm done. And I went to a phone box and I called my family, and they said, go to a hotel and get them to call me when you're there. Mm-hmm. So I went to the Hotel Adlon, which is where Michael Jackson hanged his child over the balcony. If you're going to do it properly, right? And they called I explained the situation. They called my family. My family paid for the room. I had the longest shower of my life. Yeah. And then they flew me home. Did
you tell your parents everything at that point?
Told them everything. I told them I've got a drug problem. I've got Albanians after me, and I'm homeless. God. And I've got to say, they were amazing. Yeah. So they said, just go to a hotel, get them to call me when you're there.
Wow.
And and then I flew back. Mm-hmm. And see, the problem is I can't remember timelines, as proven earlier when you asked me when was the last time I was here, and I said 6 months, and apparently it was a year ago. So, so I went into rehab. Mm-hmm. But where one of the problems I was having is we didn't know what rehab to go to, because if I asked you to name a rehab, the only one you'll probably know is the Priory. Yeah. right? And unless you've got 25, 30,000 pounds, you're not going in there.
Yeah.
So we were struggling where to go, and it was only for a friend of my dad's that knew one in Bognor Regis.
Right.
So I ended up going into rehab for 3 months, and
so at this point you wanted to go to rehab. You were at your
lowest. I
lowest.
was ready.
You were ready.
Completely had enough of it all.
Do you think an addict has to be ready to go to rehab, or do you think they can be forced?
I think an addict has to be willing.
Willing, yeah.
And I think it's, I can't tell you how many lives that we've saved because we've made parents give ultimatums to people.
Right.
Because I think, yes, if they get to the stage of shouting off the rooftops, I want the help, great. But unfortunately, people don't always make it to that stage.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think you've got to do what you've got to do.
Yeah. So we're going to come to rehab in a second, but looking back at that time when you were at your lowest, when you look back at that now, how does that make you feel?
When I look back at which bit?
At your lowest moments, you know, lying and being homeless, people weeing on you.
It's weird because I try to picture it, but that part of it is just, it's pretty much black in my mind, if that makes sense. I remember weird things about getting noodles from a really good noodle place out there for €1. But yet the other side of it, it just seems to just kind of not be pictured.
So you've blanked it out, do you think? Or is it that you were under the influence of drugs back then, so that's why you don't remember?
Probably a mixture of both. It was, you know, when it got dark, that night in the doorway of Gucci, of course, darling, not Primark, Gucci. So that night was probably the scariest I think I've ever been. When it starts getting dark and it's the loneliness, I've never ever experienced anything like it. Bear in mind, I've got the most supportive, loving family. Yeah. So for me, that was hell. But it wasn't the end. Yeah. Even rehab wasn't the end. Yeah. It goes. Stay tuned.
Yes. And are you remorseful about any of the bad stuff you did? Absolutely.
You know, there's many people that say, "Oh, I'm an addict. It's not my fault." Well, no, your behaviours and your actions absolutely are. So I've spent my career, I feel, trying to make amends, and try to flick back from, rather than taking and hurting people, to helping people. And I think we're doing a pretty good job of it.
Yeah. And that's part of the programme, isn't it?
Yeah, so
making amends.
It is, and not everyone goes down that sort of fellowship route. I always say it doesn't matter what route you go down as long as it works.
Yeah.
Because some people walk in with Cocaine Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, you walk in and you hear the word God. And for a lot of people, they walk straight back out because they don't want the religious aspect. And what they don't realise is it's actually nothing to do with religion, it's to do with a higher power. Now, for me, I still struggled with that, but I used the word God. For me, it stood for good, orderly direction. Okay. Some people change it to group of druggies or a group of drunks because that power of the group is more powerful than me being by myself. Yeah. So for me, it was good, orderly direction. So trying to help others, be honest, be selfless rather than selfish, try and help people where I can, just trying to pack as much as I can in the day. So using the opposite behaviours to what I did in addiction.
Yeah. And so you said you went to rehab for 3 months. And what kind of treatment was it? Was it part of a kind of a fellowship program?
Yeah, so they do what they call the Minnesota model, which is the rehab version of 12 steps. But you obviously have a combination of other modalities like, you know, cognitive behavioural therapy, motivational interviewing, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. But the psychoeducational workshops are probably one of the most important part because you've got to deal with the underlying issues, and then you've got to learn those coping skills, those relapse prevention techniques, how to deal with triggers, everything to kind of maintain it. So anyone can stay clean in a rehab, but everything the rehab's trying to do is to help you stay clean when you're out. However, they gave me a really bad bit of advice, and the people that I was in rehab with most of them were coming from prison to get a reduced sentence. So they ultimately, I had my family, and I was living with my family, and they said, you need to be more independent. You need to learn to be more independent rather than relying on your family. You need to get your own property. I said, well, how do you expect me to do that? I've got nothing. You need to claim benefits. Well, I didn't know how to claim benefits, but the people in rehab showed me how to do so and get a flat, which I got in Barnet, in an area I didn't know anyone, completely by myself. And it was a bad bit of advice, because then I felt isolated and lonely again. And then I ended up relapsing.
Did you? Okay.
This is about 2 months after rehab.
Oh, wow.
So I always, connection is the opposite to addiction. It goes back to that experiment that was done. I don't know if you ever heard about it. It's called Rat Park.
Okay.
So what they did is they put a rat in a cage by itself. Then they put 2 bottles of water on the side of the cage. One which was infused with cocaine and one which wasn't. It was just water. So the rat tried both bottles of water, but only went back to the one with cocaine in it. So then they repeated the experiment, and they called it Rat Park, where they put this rat in a cage with all of his friends, spinny wheels, tubes, the whole lot. And all of the rats tried both bottles of water, but they only went back to the one without cocaine.
Wow.
So what they came to realise is the opposite to addiction is connection. And I was given contradicting advice leaving rehab to that.
Yeah. So after your relapse, what happened then?
So my brother, he built up a security company whilst he was in the police, and it grew too big, which is why he ended up leaving the police. And he said to me, do you want to do some work on a door in South London, security work, for cash? I thought, great, I could do with some money. So I thought, be great, I'll meet some nice ladies. He missed a big bit of information of what type of club it was. So it was a gay club, no problem with that. It was the fact of what type it was. So it was a fetish club, and there was a dark room, and there was all sorts of things going on, and you got to patrol this room, and it was just quite and then I won't even go into what I saw.
Yeah.
But it's not what you see in a normal club, let's say.
Yeah.
And in the gay scene, there are certain drugs that are quite popular, like crystal meth, GHB, GBL, ketamine, things like that. Now with GHB, it's a really dangerous drug, like really dangerous. The chances of a seizure are really high. And this was New Year's Eve on 2008, and a gentleman was having a fit. And whilst I called an ambulance for him, I took his wallet, went to the toilet, and went to use his drugs, and I was using it. And then I looked at myself in the mirror. I thought, what the hell have you become? This is a vulnerable person that's, okay, I've called the ambulance. Thankfully, I did that, but, and I looked in the mirror and I thought, what have you become? Yeah. And it's out of everything that I'd done, that was the trigger point for me. So 11:57 p.m, New Year's Eve 2008 was the last time I'd ever taken any mind-altering substance.
Wow. To
this day. You look back at this and you think, I'm not, why, how can I do that? Because that's not me. But I did.
Yeah.
And I'm not proud of it.
Yeah. So you went back to rehab?
No. So I threw myself into Cocaine Anonymous.
Okay.
And I did 90 meetings in 90 days. So I said, how on earth am I going to do 90 meetings in 90 days? And someone said to me, well, how often do you use? I said, every day. So they said, you can use 90 times in 90 days, but you won't go to those lengths for recovery.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, fair point. So I went to 90 meetings in 90 days and took phone numbers. And, you know, for me, I was single at the time. And for me, you know, you're 26 or whatever it was. You want to go out and have fun. But I was too scared to. And I think one of the best things about the fellowship for me was not necessarily the meetings and working the steps, which are also vital, but it was the network of friends that you build up. And it's going for the coffees after, going out for dinner, going to a convention in Brighton for the week. You know, these things were just incredible.
It's the connections again.
Absolutely.
And have you maintained these connections 14 years on?
Yeah.
And how have you stayed clean for 14 years?
Well, I set up my business, and you know, I went back. I mentioned that the only rehab that you'd heard of is the Priory.
Yeah.
So when a year into recovery, I'd had quite a few people reaching out to me where to go, and I didn't really know the answers, and I just started researching. So I thought, well, what rehabs are out there? So I started researching what rehabs there are, what they charge, what substances they detox for, where they're located, what their CQC ratings are, everything. Yeah. And somehow, and ironically, I had £46 to my name, and that's what I paid a guy to do my website who helped me.
Wow.
And
value.
Really good. I can't get that these days. And it's now one of the largest addiction advisory services in the country.
Amazing.
And we help hundreds and thousands of people a year.
Are you a telephone service? Or?
We're a telephone, so we literally hold their hands and deal with it. Yeah. So if they've not got any money and they want to know what charitable or statutory options are available to them, we sell them. If they've got money available and they don't know which private options are affordable for them or what routes they can go down, because some people say, well, I'm a single mother. I can't take 28 days out of rehab because I've got a child dependent on me. We have other options for that. We have intensive outpatients, online programs. There's everything. Yeah. So it's depending on what people's needs are. Yeah. And one thing that I've realised is not many people have the same needs. Everyone's different.
So you don't need 20, 30 grand to go to the Priory? Is
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Are there NHS facilities?
Yes, but it's hard. It's the funding process, because when someone reaches that point that they want help, you've got that window, and their heads can change from one day to the next. Yeah. But you really want to try and maximise on that window of opportunity, and the funding process can take 9 months, because you've got to go through... it's taxpayers' money. So if everyone just say, I want rehab, and they just say, yeah, no problem, we'll fund it, it's not being responsible to taxpayers' money. Yeah. So they have to have a whole funding process to go through to ensure they're serious about this, that they're committed, and that is quite a process.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, do you agree that these days kind of alcohol and drugs to a degree have been slightly normalised in society, and there's quite a lot of people that, you know, do drink a lot or do take a lot of drugs and still function, you know, in a normal life, day to day, normal job, family, etc. So my question is, at what point do they know they're an addict, and when should they seek help?
Great question. So if you looked at every rehab around the world, 70% of the clients in that rehab will be made up of alcoholics. Mm-hmm. It's the biggest one by far. And all it is a drug in liquid form. Yeah. So the answer to your question is, if you love drinking or you love taking cocaine and it's not affecting your work, your relationships, your finances, your health, would you stop it? You wouldn't. So that line is consequences. If you're starting to get consequences, whether it be financial, work, relationships, whatever it be, that line there is when people, I would say, then become receptive to think, okay, I might have a problem.
So that's really interesting. So consequences, basically.
Correct.
Yeah.
If you don't have any consequences, then why on earth would you stop? Yeah. So that's when families reach out and say, oh, my son, he's doing X, Y, and Z or whatever, and he won't get any help. Consequences.
Yeah. And so for people listening, if they think that they might have a problem, what would you advise them first off to do? Would it be to, kind of seek their local AA or Cocaine Anonymous, or what would your initial advice be to them?
So I've heard some really bad answers to that. Right. So I had someone once, an influencer said to someone, if you feel that you got a problem, you feel you don't have a problem, then just stop. Now, if you're drinking a litre bottle of vodka or spirits a day and you just stop, there is a chance of a seizure.
Right. So
don't do that. Speak to someone first as a first starting point. They can absolutely call Help for Addiction. The website is www.help4addiction.co.uk. There's loads of information there, but I would say do your research first before doing anything drastic.
Yeah.
So,
and we'll put the details about Help for Addiction in the show notes. So if anyone does want to contact anyone for advice, they can seek you that way. Going back to you. You've already told me that you hate exercise, which a lot of people use therapeutically.
Well, I'm just going to recap. I'm just going to recap that. So I said to Emma that I've come to realise that exercise is bad because whenever I do it, I get hurt. And if I will never injure myself laying on the sofa watching a Netflix series. So, figure it out. It's the same reason why I say sleep's bad, because I go to bed feeling quite good and I wake up feeling like shit.
Oh, really? Well, you did something wrong there. Yeah. So I was going to ask you if there's any specific strategies which you have used to kind of help drive you forward.
So to
achieve, to kind of looking at where you were to where you've come.
I think it sounds maybe a little bit cliche, but do what makes you happy, I think, is very important. But also, don't let anyone tell you that you can't do it. If you believe in something and you work hard at it, you can absolutely get it.
Yeah. So hard work.
Yeah. I think it's hard. I think hard work, but also balance, because if you go, you've got to obviously look after yourself at the same time. And in my industry, there's, lots of people that own rehabs. They're working round the clock and they are drained, and that has effects in all areas. And it's quite easy to fall into that trap of doing that. But at 5:30, I finish work, I go home, family time. And that's it. I don't like to miss bath time with the kids. I put the kids to bed and then I spend time with my wife. And then on the weekends, family time. That's it. And that balance is vital. Yeah,
balance is great. So for anyone listening, Nick hasn't just said to work really hard, not sleep, not exercise, and eat loads of food on the sofa.
Correct.
But I see what you're saying. It's balance. But hard work during the hours that you're committed to work, which is really helpful. Final question I like to ask my guests. If you could go back in time when things were at your lowest, so like your breaking point, what do you wish you could tell yourself now?
Go and do Emma Levy's show.
Except that.
When I was at my lowest, what I know now, I would tell them, get honest. Because secrets keep you sick. And the quicker you can get honest, the quicker you can move forward. That's great. Thank you. Really helpful. Nick, thank you for coming on today. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I really think if anyone's listening that, your story is inspirational. And I really think that it can help people going through similar things. So thank you very much. Thank you. Please remember to rate, review and subscribe, because apparently it does make a huge difference to the podcast.
We're so excited that the first series of When Life Gives You Lemons is sponsored by Co's Linen. Co's supply some of the UK's finest hotels with luxury linens, including bedding, towels and bathrobes. So if you want to feel like you're on holiday or a spa break every day, then I can highly recommend their products. I really love my personalised bathrobe. You know that feeling when you've had a long day at work or a really hard workout? That's when all I want is to have a hot bath, dry myself in my fluffy Co's towel and then relax on the sofa. And that is when you'll find me in my Co's bathrobe. Honestly, the most cosy item I've ever owned. All products can be personalised with custom monograms designed by leading interior designer Sophie Patterson. You can find them exclusively online at www.coslinen.com. Listeners to When Life Gives You Lemons can save 10% with the discount code POD10. You can find a link in the show notes.